you very much for coming. This great event we are having here. We have a very interesting topic. I would say that in some elements, your papers talk each other. So I guess that's one of the advantages of the panel. So congratulations to those that organized the event. In that sense, this panel is about governance issues at the international, European, national, and municipal levels. Einat, you are municipal.
I'm the municipal representing.
No, but still, I think that I agree that it is about governance. I would say also that it is about legitimacy and reputation in governance, in the case of NATO, and also with relations to democratic backsliding, delegitimation. Can we speak about that? Regarding governance and the limits of what could be done in terms of governance. What are the rules of the game? So what we'll do is we have 1 hour and a half. The idea is to have presentations of between, as I said, between 12 to 15 minutes. At the end, I will try to provide some comments on my reading and the presentations, and then open to the conversation. Okay, you are the audience. So I hope you have questions, and you have answers. Okay, so let me present first the different participants. Dr. Tali Dingo, together with Dr. Eyal Robinson, that is here, they will be presented. Tal is from the IASEI Academic College, Eyal from Ariel University, and you will be presenting a paper on signaling virtue. The role of legitimacy and reputation in NATO's enlargement strategies. That it is being published now in Politics and Governance, right? In the specialist.
It is not published yet. It is after first round of R&R.
Oh, okay. I'm confused. It's a special issue, right? On legitimacy issue. I remember to have seen some papers of the special issue. Very people interested in legitimacy issues. I guess you will be very interested in special issues. Then we will move forward with Dr. Emmanuel Blanc and Yuval Finkel. He's not coming, right? But been here in the program of University of Haifa, and together with Dr. Stefan Hagenman of Technical University of Kaiserslautern. You will be presenting on unpacking constructive criticism, the case of the European response to democratic backsliding in Israel. The titles of the papers are the same titles of presentation. That's good. No, it happened to me in the last conference in the IASEI that they were totally different. And we have Einat El-Azari, that you will be presented from Hebrew University of Jerusalem. An office close to us in the European Forum. Mapping essential components of urban climate experiments, the case of Vienna's Greizelmarie. Okay.
Good.
And Stockholm's congestion tax. Okay, and I will discuss.
Present.
Less than 15 minutes in that case.
Okay, I'm sorry. But okay.
Yes, it was added at the end.
The new
No,
version.
can
Okay,
check
but
it.
you did not send me a paper, right?
No.
Okay, so at least I will try to provide comments anyway to the presentation, but okay. So Dr. Ina Kue from Tel Aviv University, you will be presenting before Einat, according to the program, on corruption, populist rule, and democratic backsliding in Europe. Case studies from Hungary, Poland, and Italy. Okay, so thank you much. Yes, no, let's try to keep it in 12 minutes. Okay, in that sense. Okay, please.
Okay, so the paper I wish to present here, written with Dr. Eyal Robinson, argues that external crises such as wars, humanitarian crises. What?
I think no.
I don't see, but I will speak louder, okay? So the paper I wish to present is written with Dr. Eyal Rubinson from Ariel University. And its main argument is that external crises such as wars, humanitarian crises, or global pandemics are opportunities to pursue core organizational goals through public diplomacy and strategic communications, such as membership expansion. The article aspires to assess how IOs, international organizations, signal their willingness to expand their membership through public digital diplomacy during external crises, concentrating on NATO enlargement in the wake of Russia's full-fledged invasion of Ukraine in February 22. We investigate this theme using discourse analysis of more than 800 NATO tweets and Facebook posts between February 21 and May 22, modeling the alliance's membership signalings towards Finland and Sweden from the timeframe leading up to the Russian invasion until their joint membership application. These digital platforms account for one of NATO's principal public diplomacy mechanisms, directed at a combined audience of over 4 million followers. To account for the effect of this signaling, we complement the analysis with an assessment of public opinion trends in Finland and Sweden about NATO, demonstrating the impact on the alliance's legitimacy and reputation. Our result illustrates the centrality of reputational and legitimacy-related concerns in the external signaling of IOs in times of crisis. Our study can be situated within three main bodies of academic literature. The first branch includes studies on legitimacy and reputation in general, and that of international organizations in particular. The second branch includes research on public diplomacy and signaling. And the third branch includes recent studies on NATO's enlargement and its public diplomacy. The main argument of the reputation literature is that within the realm of organizational reputation, multiple subsets of reputation may coexist simultaneously, reflecting different facets of an organization's behavior, including but not limited to its effectiveness, professionalism, credibility, integrity, moral standing, and normative legitimacy. Reputation also means that international organizations highly value the public image, recognizing its significance in maintaining global appeal and advancing policies agendas. A favorable public perception enables IOs to garner the popular support necessary to drive member states towards new policies or reforms and attract new members. To safeguard their reputation, IOs invest in community engagement and public relations initiatives to position their policy recommendations as credibly and trustworthy. One effective means of signaling IO's objectives and strategically shaping public perceptions and behavior is through public diplomacy. Within this framework, IOs employ various communicative strategies. These strategies include issuing calls to action, employing tactics of shaming or blaming, reinforcing or contesting international norms, depolitization of or desecuritizing issues, and emphasizing global cooperation. Literature has shown that IOs utilize PD or public diplomacy and particularly PDD, which is public digital diplomacy, during ongoing crises such as humanitarian crises, wars, and peacekeeping operations, and global pandemics. A wide area of literature also explores the role of signaling models in the study of international organizations, focusing on how IOs make various forms of commitment and assume tangible costs to convey their intention and policy choices credibility. IOs are expected to engage in membership signaling, a means of strategic communication utilized to indicate their interest and willingness to include a particular state as a member. It may include communications highlighting influence, legitimacy, capacity, leadership, and genuine value for the potential members, which in turn are translated into a possible policy change. Yet, existing research on NATO's public diplomacy does not provide a comprehensive, analytical, and empirically sound examination of its public diplomacy communicative strategies. NATO signaling towards potential members via public diplomacy becomes crucial in the shadow of the war of Ukraine, which could challenge NATO's reputation. Firstly, it could raise doubts about NATO's professionalism and capability due to perceived failures in deterring Russia. Secondly, NATO's credibility and integrity might be questioned due to perceived reluctance to provide collective security vis-à-vis Russia's aggression. To safeguard its reputation, we claim that NATO is expected to engage in strategic public communications as signals to potential new partners. Firstly, by showcasing military exercises, NATO may counter Russia's digital diplomacy by debunking misleading statements and reinforcing its professional image. Secondly, to build trust and establish credibility, NATO may reaffirm its commitment. NATO may reaffirm its commitment to collective security, addressing concerns about the effectiveness of bilateral cooperation versus NATO's collective defense guarantee. Lastly, to signal the importance of preserving norms, NATO may communicate that in the face of Russia's violations of international law, the traditional norms of neutrality and non-belligerency may no longer suffice. To assess NATO's use of strategic communication on social media outlets, we compile a new corpus of over 800 posts issued by NATO on Facebook and Twitter between 2021 and 2022. The timeframe was selected because it was the most relevant period for the alliance to issue membership signaling towards Finland and Sweden, from the phase leading up to the Russian invasion until their formal membership application on 18 in May 22. Our qualitative interpretive analysis of the corpus is then supplemented by a visual representation depicting the frequency of each membership signaling strategy along the examined period. And finally, in order to establish a correlation with the Sweden and Finland's public opinion vis-a-vis NATO membership, we leveraged consistent survey data on support for NATO membership available throughout our research period. And now to the finding. The analysis of NATO social media membership signaling efforts between February 21 and May 22 presents a clear narrative of how the alliance signaling evolved in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I will now give an illustration, only a very specific samples of illustration for the three signaling strategy using the example that you see here. One of NATO's posts, for example, in Facebook from March 31, 2021, highlighting NATO's real power and readiness can clarify how the professionalism and capability communicative signaling looks like. You can read. NATO fighter jets scrambled 10 times to intercept 6 different groups of Russian warplanes. NATO forces demonstrated their readiness and capability to guard Allied skies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Showcasing NATO's military postures, as well as highlighting military exercises, aims to signal potential member states and the public that despite Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an event that could be perceived as a deterrence failure, NATO remains fully capable of defending its territory against any attack. This notion has been echoed countless times in speeches and more traditional alliance statements. The second communicative strategy here signals that NATO is credible. And I will cite, NATO has kept its citizens safe for over 70 years and will continue to adapt in the decade and beyond. Thus, to build trust and establish credibility, NATO signals demonstrate an unwavering commitment to collective security by demonstrating that its defense assurances are not only effective, but also reliable. This approach addresses concerns among member states and potential partners regarding the robustness of NATO's collective defense, reassuring them that the alliance offers stronger protection and a unified response to threats. Finally, here, Multiple pieces of evidence were found for the third strategy pertaining to signals of normative legitimacy. A post, for example, from May 17, 21, emphasized that we are an alliance of 30 nations working together to protect our people and our values, freedom, equality, and human rights. Numerous times, NATO also signaled its view about its opponent. I didn't put the citation there. Signals its view about its opponent's illegitimate conduct with an emphasis on Russia and Belarus. Examples, for just one example, for a site in Facebook in June 21, we have strongly condemned the serious violation by Belarus of the norms of international civil aviation and the fundamental rights of the freedom to speech, and I welcome sanctions by NATO allies and the European Union. This shows the importance of like-minded countries standing together. Concluding this discussion, these results indicate a marked shift in the frequency and nature of NATO strategic communications, with distinct trends emerging across the three identified signaling strategies that you see here. In the period leading up to the Russian invasion, yes, in February 22, NATO's membership signaling was relatively reduced. Posts were principally focused on the professionalism and capability strategy, communicative strategy. This emphasis suggests that NATO was primarily concerned with demonstrating its operational readiness and military competence. During this time, the credibility and integrity and normative legitimacy strategies were less prominent, constituting a smaller portion of the total posts. The relatively low membership signaling level in the invasion lead-up can be attributed to several factors. First, before the invasion, the security environment in Europe, while tense, was not necessarily perceived to be on the brink of dramatic, almost unprecedented escalation. Hence, NATO's focus on demonstrating its capabilities likely stemmed from a desire to maintain deterrence without necessarily provoking Russia or causing alarm. Secondly, NATO's engagement with potential members, with Sweden and Finland at the epicenter, was more measured and incremental. The focus was on building long-term relationships and trust rather than urgent recruitment, reflecting a strategic patience that anticipated gradual shift rather than immediate crisis. Finally, NATO also concentrated on internal cohesion and addressing existing challenges within the alliance, thus prioritizing demonstrating competence over aggressive membership expansion. However, the Russian invasion in February 22 marked a turning point, altering NATO's strategic communication. This dramatic increase highlights the relevance of normative appeals in the context of Russia's violation of international law. By emphasizing shared values and norms, NATO sought to strengthen its perceived morals and ethical foundation to potential members. While pre-invasion, the alliance prioritized military capability signaling, the rise in normative appeals reflects a strategic turn. In recognizing the watershed moment, NATO sought to emphasize shared values and substantiate its role not only as a dominant military alliance, but also as protector of democratic principles. יש לי עוד דקה או שלא? No? Okay, so you can see here the second I don't know, level of results that demonstrate the way NATO, of course, Russian invasion in Ukraine, but for real, also the influence of public diplomacy on, you can see here the way also public opinion, Sweden public opinion, as well as Finland public opinion, pretty much at the same time when NATO began its public diplomacy, signaling its willingness to expand its membership. You can see how the two countries, the public opinion in two countries got more favor towards the enlargement, which is a great turn in Finland and Sweden. Finland and Sweden for decades and hundreds of years were neutral countries. Even though after, at the end of the Cold War, when NATO started to enlarge and broaden its membership, Finland and Sweden were very, very firm on their neutrality. So here we see the results. Okay, of course, there is the realist result. Russia invaded Ukraine, but you can see the interchange between persuasion and signaling and rising favor opinions in the two countries towards membership in that's it.
We move forward with.
Yes, I will share this. Emmanuel, what is yours? This one? No. Emma.
Do you think that the mouse works from here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So my presentation today is an ongoing project that I'm currently conducting together with Dr. Stefan Hagemann and PhD student from the University of Haifa, Yuval Finkel. And you will see the beginning of the presentation is very well constructed, and the more I will talk, the more I will not try to sound confused, but we are still in the process of formulating the arguments, so we are very much looking forward to any of your comments or feedback. So the title of the presentation is Unpacking Constructive Criticism, the Case of the European Union Responses. That was the only change to the title. I added an S. Democratic backsliding in Israel. And so basically, this project started with the observation that states on the international stage constantly comment and criticize each other's policies, behaviors, decisions. And this has far-reaching implications for interstate relations. If you criticize the policies of others, you might expose yourself to the creation of a diplomatic crisis between different members. You might enhance the retrenchment of certain states that are in any ways not very open to criticism. So this is a diplomatic practice that is very salient. And yet, if you look at the literature in IR and in diplomacy, looking at this subject, most of the studies have focused on the most extreme negative kind of criticism, which is often called political condemnation, which is a discursive practice that very much focuses on the emotional mechanism of naming and shaming. So the emotion of shame is always very critical. You identify a country that very often in the context of human rights has violated an important norm, and then you will strongly condemn the behavior of the state in a way that is shameful, in the hope that it will change the behavior of the state, because it will lead to a deterioration of the reputation of the state, of its legitimacy. So there is a lot of literature about that, about the different techniques being applied, whether or not it is effective, etc. But what about criticism among friends and allies? Of course, there are plenty of opportunities for disagreements. And here in this case, political condemnation is not necessarily the most, the handiest tool in the foreign policy diplomatic toolbox. So we wanted to unpack alternative forms of criticism. And this led us to ask the following question: how and why do states engage in the diplomatic practice of constructive criticism? And so for now, the working argument, which is not, I'm not satisfied with it, but this is how it is as of today. We argue that constructive criticism allows, on one hand, states to balance between the expression of disapproval, so that they make their point that they disagree, but at the same time, it allows them to preserve important relationships, particularly among allies sharing common values, which is something,
right?
yeah, which is something that a political condemnation doesn't do, because it is, in its essence, it's very adversarial. It's aimed at shaming, and so it entails a higher risk of actually damaging the relationship. So it has a higher cost. And so what we are trying to do in the article is to develop a theoretical framework with different parts. So first, while in the literature there is some reference here and there to constructive criticism, particularly when we talk about friendship relationships, there is not yet any solid conceptualization of what it entails discursively. So we try to define what it means, and we break down this practice into 6 different components that I'm going to detail in a minute. And then we thought, okay, now we need to explain how, if political condemnation is based on the mobilization of shame, then there might be another mechanism at play in this kind of criticism. And so this is the very last addition to the paper. We thought of developing a mechanism that relates to recognition of the other, with the main emotions of empathy and hope at its core, by contrast to shame. And finally, the last step with which I think we're a bit struggling is to explain, so why then do they choose this type of criticism rather than another one? And here we are currently interviewing European diplomats based in Israel to try to understand their response to the democratic backsliding that we are currently witnessing in Israel. So that's the plan. You might say it's perhaps a bit too much. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. So to frame a little bit more the discussion, we try to conceptualize constructive criticism as a foreign policy tool that can be placed along a continuum. Every single time that an international event occurs in the world, and it happens all the time, states have different possibilities. They might either decide to openly support the government's decision by engaging in the rhetoric of praise, endorsing the policy, so clearly expressing their approval, or most of the time states also do choose to remain silent, not taking any risk. So here there is no public statements whatsoever, or at least they don't engage publicly with it. This is something that has come up a lot in the interviews that we're doing. There is expressing disapproval behind closed doors, and there is going public and tweeting about it, which is interesting itself. And then at the extreme side, there is the political condemnation that I talked about. And so we thought, okay, perhaps there is something else that needs to be there on the spectrum, and this is this third option of engaging in a very careful criticism. So let's look now at the different components. Some of these components exist in the literature, but most of them have been identified by examining more than 100 statements and tweets of European foreign ministers and leaders and ambassadors regarding the judicial overhaul in Israel. So we really coded one statement after the other, trying to identify these components. Some of them are absolutely essential. four first ones. And the two last ones, we think that they are just amplifying, they're more like,
Yeah.
the fifth and the sixth, they are more, they're there to mitigate the potential adversarial response. So just going through them very quickly, because I want to illustrate with an example. The first component of constructive criticism is this notion of commonality. Whenever a state engages in this type of criticism, they will always try to emphasize what is common between the targeted state and the criticizer. So it can be common, often it is about shared values or shared interests or shared challenges. But the idea is that there is some kind of reciprocity between the two sides, and that there is something very precious to be preserved. And that's why often the commonality is also linked to this, the goal of eventually preserving the cooperation on the basis of these common values or challenges. Secondly, specificity. A constructive criticism, and if you are teaching students, you know that when you give feedback, you don't say, well, this paper is crap. You try to be as specific as possible, because you don't want the student to think that he is embodying the paper, right? So what is problematic here is your introduction. And this is the same idea when you criticize the behavior of another state. There is a specific aspect of your policy or of your policy that is problematic. It's not your entire identity and legitimacy as a state that is here at stake. So when you want to be constructive, you need to be very specific. Then, same for the student-teacher relationship, you need to provide very actionable feedback. So how do we move from here? How do we make things better? You don't just say, it's not good. You try to engage and provide actionable, forward-looking feedback, because you trust the criticized party that they will act on it. It's part of the relationship of friendship. You listen to me, or you try to do something about it. So actionable feedback is important. Of course, respectful tone, because it encourages cooperation and open dialogue, and this relates very much to recognition. Then, to be a good criticizer and to be heard by the other side, you need to demonstrate a high level of knowledge. It means that you need to know what you're talking about. You need to have a very detailed and fair understanding of the issues that the country is currently dealing with. Really? Okay. And finally, all this must be wrapped in some kind of positive emotions. So we created, and I will not go into it, a comparative table between naming and shaming and constructive criticism to show how on all these dimensions they're working on a completely different.
And naming and shaming is political condemnation.
Yeah, that's the mechanism that is at the heart of it. Okay, now the mechanism at the core of this kind of discursive practice that should in fact in theory encourage more cooperation and engagement is based on the issue of providing recognition to the others by recognizing who they are, what they are going through, talking to them in a respectful manner, but also giving them hope by showing them how to achieve a better performance, how to change their policy, reassuring them, showing them that you trust them, that they're able to do it. Okay, now moving to why do states engage in broadly criticism and more specifically constructive criticism. The literature has given us already a lot of very good explanations, ranging from realist approaches that just discard this altogether as cheap talk, constructive approaches that would either emphasize the importance of the norms that need to be upheld. So you need to criticize human rights violations because the international liberal order is important to you, or because you define yourself as the defender of democracy, and so for ontological security reasons, you have to say something, otherwise you would betray yourself.
Mm.
Or it can be a domestic politic issue. If your public opinion is very much in favor of a certain state or against it, then to gain political points, you will voice criticism or refrain from doing it. So this is valid also for naming and shaming. The two other rationales that we have found that are not covered by the other type of criticism is the preservation of good diplomatic relations, and also this idea that a problem has to be solved. By only condemning, you are not providing any solutions, but by providing constructive criticism, you are. So just, I mean, we can talk about it in the Q&A. We chose the case of the EU and more specifically the different member states' responses to Israel's democratic backsliding, because so we looked at the time frame was the very announcement of the judicial reform by Yariv Levin, beginning of January, until the outbreak of the war, and so that was really the time of all the mass protests, and I noticed in the demonstrations that there were a lot of people holding signs calling on the walls, Biden, Macron, please save us. There was a kind of cry to the international community, to the European states, help us to to do something here. So we collected all the official statements and tweets of 27 member states, and we analyzed them using NVivo. And as I said, we are interviewing now the diplomats to know exactly what were the motivations and what is involved in the practice of formulating these tweets, how they do it, what are the considerations. So to walk us through this process, we compiled this map. In blue, these are the states that remain silent, and most of them did. So at some point, I thought that we should write a paper about silence, but still, there are a few countries that were very clear in their expression of constructive criticism. Germany, Austria, and Netherlands, and I need to, we can come back to that. And the only country that was openly in favor of what was going on in Israel was, with not much surprise.
Well, but in favor of what's going on is in favor of the government measures or in favor of the demonstrations?
In favor of the judicial overhaul. Okay, now I will just read one sentence or two of an example of a quote that really illustrates this idea of constructive criticism. This is Stefan Seiber, the German ambassador to Israel, who mentioned in one of his tweets, we are concerned about the planned restructuring of the rule of law, especially because we Germans always greatly admire the strong and vibrant rule of law in Israel. So here they're worried about the planned restructuring of the rule of law. So there is a very specific verb. He also mentions admiration to Israel, and later down the quote, he said, I'm counting on my friend Yitzhak Herzog, on his smart and balancing voice in the Israeli debate. So here it's about expressing hope that things can change. Okay, no time for conclusions, but happy to talk about it later in the Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry that.
No, it's you don't
To push. If not, I'm not sure if we will have questions. Okay, please, Ina.
Need to stop share, I think, and then to.
Okay. Very interesting. I have no word to.
Manuel, thank you so much for the transition. Because I'm focusing also on like in this area, not computer related, but for sure overlaps. So my name is Ina Kuba, and I do a lot of research on corruption. This is my background. And today I would like to talk about the connection between corruption, populism, democratic backsliding, and resistance, which is yeah, it's a concept we'd like to add to this nexus between these four concepts. So first of all, how do we define corruption, which is like basically the commonly used definition? It's like the abuse of public power for private gain. So this is a definition that Transparency International is working with, academics, policymakers, and so on. There's a lot of criticism about this definition, but still it's something that we can use for comparative reasons. Populism, I think we are all aware of this, of the concept or the definitions. I will only touch on this very shortly. Democratic backsliding, we see, of course, all around the world. We are in the so-called third wave of autocratization, and in our research, which is basically a book, that's why I haven't sent you anything, Daniel, but I'm sure in the future we'll focus on several countries. So Hungary, Italy, and Poland are only like three examples of this, and they are mainly, these are of course right-wing populist countries, and we will also focus on left-wing populist countries. And we added resistance because we can see already some dynamics of resistance when we talk about demonstrations and protests. We see this a lot in Israel, of course. We see a lot of pushbacks from the media, but of course also legal frameworks. And I will talk about this in a second, related to Hungary, which is a very interesting case at the moment. So this is basically our conceptual framework. We don't assume any causality at the moment, but we are looking now for at least like a correlation or like a path, so to say. This book, we are writing it together with Ilan Pelek. He's also doing a lot of research on populism related to corruption. And we have some discussions about the correlation, or he would even talk about causality, because he would say populism leads automatically to corruption, which I don't sign, but we have this is part of the process we're in. And he would even talk about corrupted populism. I'm also very critical about this, but this is in the making, so to say. So you can see populism leads to corruption, and then the next step would be democratic decline, and also in some of the cases resistance, and then basically there can also be feedback loops within this model. There is some research when we talk about corruption and populism. So we know, of course, a lot of studies in the field of populism. We know a lot about populism and democratic decline, but there are only a few studies that concentrate on the relationship between populism and corruption. We see a lot of links between populist leader and corrupt actions. So these are our working hypotheses. For now, it's more like a qualitative approach, like more explorative. But still, I think it's good to have some hypotheses that we can test in this case. So populism increases corruption. Corrupted populism negatively affects democratic quality and freedoms. And the third step, resistance to corrupt populism mitigates its negative impacts. What is our methodological approach? We will do, or like we're doing currently, case studies. We focusing more or less, as I said, like we follow a qualitative approach, and maybe in the next step we can also add some quantitative statistical analysis, because actually there is data. We have the Corruption Perception Index. We have a lot of data from Freedom House, and also the Democracy Index. But first of all, we would like to have a more qualitative approach. This is our core argument. Populism is inherently linked to corruption, eroding democracy and restricting political freedoms, in particular when we talk about minorities and opponents. I don't want to go through all of these 10 steps, but this is what we see in the literature. So we try to summarize it. The rule of law, we know populism undermines legal supremacy. We know that populist leaders or populist movements are also very interested in controlling public opinion, or to manipulate even public opinions, to control the media. Israel is a good example. Israel is, of course, also part of this book. When we talk about assault on judicial institutions, there are also cases of violence and intimidation, in particular when we talk about the US and Trump, it's also a case in the book. And in general, we see that there is like a strong impact on democracy in general. When we have a look at the relationship between populism and corruption, we see all kinds of corrupt actions, in particular state capture and media capture. State capture when specific interests are part of the of legislations. We don't really know where these interests are coming from. Usually these are a handful people with in particular economic and political interest, and also media capture, as I said, as part also of a lot of populist leaders to control the media. We see a lot of patronage as form of favoritism, and we see this in all of the free countries to more or less extent. Another interesting example is also that a lot of populist leaders also use corruption as a rhetorical tool. When we have a look at Trump, for example, we're saying, okay, now I'm here, I'm in office and I'm cleaning up, and we are the good people, the others are the bad people, especially migrants. They are dirty, they are bad, they eat dogs, they eat cats, they all of these very negative assumptions about the so-called outgroup. And we also see this in Italy, for example, talking about migrants and even like establishing a so-called refugee camp in Albania. In Hungary as well. I will show like some quotes in a second. And another interesting topic is that we also see that corrupt actions in the past are basically influencing voting behavior in the future. So there's a research by IASEI et al. From 2018 that analyzing corruption in the 90s in Italy, and they show that basically the teenagers of this time were so influenced by these corrupt actions under Berlusconi and so on, that they lost their trust in institutions, and this leads to the fact that today they are voting right-wing populist parties. And we can also see this in other countries because, of course, this is a very important time of a person during this teenager time. When we talk about resistance, these can be, as I said, all forms of, when we talk about legal resistance, parliamentary, media resistance. For now, we have a stronger look at the civil society because they can play an important role, as we could see this in Poland, for instance. And these are the 3 cases that we studied for now, for today. Of course, we find more examples in Europe when we talk about the case selection. So of course, we could also add the Netherlands. We could also add the AfD as populist right-wing movements and movement in Germany. So Hungary under Viktor Orban, I think this case is like one of the best or like well-researched cases. Poland under Kaczynski, who was in power from 2015 to 2023. And Italy under Giorgia Meloni, which is very interesting to me because I also do a lot of research on corruption and gender. And finally, we have more women in power. So Meloni is a great example for populism and other actions, behaviors. Okay, so Hungary, we see a strong connection between populism and corruption. Here's one of the examples I want to show you. We Hungarians are not a mixed race, and we do not want to become a mixed race. diversity is not a virtue. We do not want to become diverse and get mixed up with others. Migration is dangerous and bad. So again, it's populist narratives. And since Orban is in power, we show very high levels of corruption, having a look at Transparency International, and also very strong connections to democratic decline. And a lower link to resistance, because this is a very long-term process, of course, already in Hungary, and Orban and the Fidesz party managed quite well to undermining democratic institutions and controlling also the public narrative and oppressing civil society organizations. This was even more unable due to polarization within the society, which is quite similar also to the developments in Israel. Poland, as I said, is a very interesting case at the moment, because we even see like a feedback loop, or Ilan would even talk about reverse corruption, because under Kaczynski, we saw a lot of anti-elite rhetoric. Again, this like all the previous people who were in power are responsible for the so-called mess we have at the moment, because they brought corruption into the system. Similar also when we talk about Trump, who's saying, but now I'm here and I'm taking care of this. This is not my responsibility. This was the Biden administration, for instance. And they're also playing a lot with anxiety, with fears, especially when we talk about social inequalities within the country. Also in Poland, we saw like a strong democratic decline when we talk about the judicial independence, when we talk about independent media, so like a strong consolidation of power. Again, also high level of polarization and social divisions, and we see this in a lot of countries. But in Poland, at least, there are a lot of resistance. There's a lot of resistance, also strongly connected to women rights organizations, who are trying, of course, to stop this democratic decline. And also the European Union is very try to do some intervention, but it's more or less successful. And Italy, as the last case, Giorgia Meloni is very successful on social media, and her Facebook strategy in 2022 helped her a lot to come into power. So she really knows how to play the game, so to say. Italy is quite experienced when we talk about populism, as I said, Berlusconi, Salvini, the Five Stars movement, and so on. And Giorgia Meloni is going into this steps. And Italy is very well experienced when we talk about corruption. We still don't see like a lot of institutional changes in Italy, but it's whereas we are at the beginning, so to say, when we compare it, for example, with Hungary. And there are some resistant movements in Italy through democratic engagement, but still there's also a lot of political fragmentation, a lot of polarization within the Italian society. So we see different connections between the four concepts in these three cases. The highest level of resistance we see now in Poland, the lowest level of resistance in Hungary due to the oppression of the society organizations and the media. And in Italy, we still don't know that. So to conclude, and the future prospects, so to say, as mentioned before, we're in the third wave of autocratization. So that's why I think it's very important that we try to understand the dynamics between these four concepts, and also what we can do to empower civil society organizations to reject this the undermining of democratic principles and institutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think that last but not least.
Yeah, I hope. I haven't seen my presentation. So maybe it's in files,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Okay.
So perhaps something more optimistic. I'm not sure. It's like, listening to you, it's thinking about Israel, it's seeing the ship, it's sinking.
According to the plane.
But I'll do it very quickly, and I'll skip all the introductions. I think I won't surprise you if I say that cities get a lot of attention as pivotal players when we talk about climate change. It's not just because very soon they're about to populate more than 2/3 of the world population, but it's also because of first of all, they are the central source of emission, pollution, financial power, production power. So cities are already seen as very pivotal in the fight against climate change. In the past, I think we see it in the literature in the past 4 or 5 years. But what was interesting to us, to my supervisor and me, was that within this trend of 4 or 5 decades, we saw a newer trend, a really, as you can see in the graphs, explosion in the past decade of a new phenomenon called in the literature urban climate experiments. Just an example, the IPCC, not last report from 2023, mentioned it as pilot projects and local experiments are being implemented in different sectors. It's being mentioned both in the literature and in other places. But something very interesting happened when I started reading a lot of literature about urban climate experiments, is that urban climate experiments are being talked a lot and written about a lot and explored a lot, but there are competing understanding and definitions what urban climate experiments really are. Some describe it as pilots, as tests. Some say it's a continuous mode of governance or demonstration of climate governance, for example. Some describe it as very specific intervention. Some say it's technological, some say it's socio-technical, some say it's sociological. And that led me to my first research question on my PhD, which is the very basic question of what urban climate experiments are exactly. And in order to answer this question, I embarked in a process that starts with a really broad literature review to unpack this term. I read a lot about experiments, both in life and social sciences. What is the definition of experiments, for example, in policy experiments, in urban studies, and of course, literature on urban climate experiments in different languages of the term, but I think more than 150 or 200 articles relating to that. Based on that literature review, I built a new conceptual model that is based on 6 pillars. I'll present it in a minute, very briefly. And then I'm going to present you 2 illustrative cases from Europe, in Vienna and in Stockholm, that basically illustrate how this model really works. And finally, what is still very much work in progress, and I'll appreciate your feedback now or later, is a try to build on these cases, based on this case model, actually a new archetypes of UCEs, and I'm still working on it. So trying to define archetypes of UCEs. So very, very quickly, the conceptual model is built on 6 pillars: the motivations that lead to UCEs, the objectives, the characteristics, the challenges, the impact, and the actors. We can have a whole discussion on that. I'm not going to take you through it, but they can definitely go under this flowchart of process. What are the conditions that lead to urban climate experiments, or the characteristics and motivations? What are the mechanisms of work? So what are the objectives? There are different objectives to UCEs, the challenges, and last but not least, the outcomes. So the different impacts that UCEs have. I'm going to walk you through very briefly on the first case study in Stockholm, a very interesting one that, by the way, got a lot of literature coverage. In 2006, the city of Stockholm presented for the first time a trial period of 6 months where car owners are being charged for enter the city. Not obviously the first time it's being presented in the world, but first time in Sweden. The interesting thing about this experiment, and I'm being very short here, is that in Sweden, they discussed congestion tax since the 70s. In 2006, there is a new mayor, Annika Billström. She found a window of opportunity to do it. But the interesting thing is that they don't implement it immediately as a permanent policy. They declare we're going to have a 6-month period. And the interesting thing is that they implement a residence referendum of before, during, and after this period. to see the approval rates. And we see as the experiment goes, the approval rates are actually going higher until they reach a majority. 53% of Stockholm residents approve that this is a good policy to have. And later on, it's several months later, the parliament, the national parliament adopt this trial to become a permanent policy. So success until today, there is congestion tax in Stockholm. In Austria, another strong capital, by the way, Stockholm and Vienna are considered leaders in climate policies according to the Oxford Economics Index. In the recent years. So these are really strong cities. These cases are really strong European cities, not just in economy, but also in climate policies. The city of Vienna declares in 2020 and 2021 an experiment of a new framework between the municipality and the residents to select together, select, shape, and implement adaptation ideas for a specific from a specific neighborhood called Inner Favoriten in Vienna. This is a very mixed neighborhood in terms of socioeconomic background, ethnicities, and so on. And the municipality embarks on this project to see if that could also strengthen the relationship with these residents. And they really give them to be like partners of the municipality in this experiment, considered to be very successful. In 2023, the municipality declares that each year they're going to provide 30,000 euros to do it, each time with a different neighborhood in Vienna. When we compare these two cases, and by the way, these are just two cases, I have more cases that I'm researching, what we see according to the model very quickly is that while there are many similarities, such as in the characteristics, in the impacts, on the motivations, we also see a lot of differences. So in the Stockholm, for example, we see a lot of involvement of the government and the private sector, so technology issues that were implemented for the infrastructure, while in Vienna, we see a more local community and municipality leadership, but also the objectives are very different. If in Stockholm, one of the objectives was to reduce emissions, so this is mitigation. In Vienna, the main idea was actually adaptation, to adapt to climate change together with vulnerable societies within the city. So complete different objectives and also several different actors. This is just really a taste of the comparison that we held. And that leads me to share with you my thoughts about archetypes, and this is still work in progress. How can we define archetypes based on this research of urban climate experiments? So one path of exploration is the how, the technology that is being used, or the target audience. Like, was it through transportation, renewable energies, high-tech mobility, creation of new urban environmental communities and frameworks, as we saw in Vienna? Or I should focus more on the objectives and outcomes, the what we were trying to achieve here. Was it a stronger climate governance? Was it climate justice? Was it pure mitigation of the environmental risk or adaptation, and so on and so forth? This is what we're working on at the moment, and I promise to be quick. So last slide, what I think are interesting future research avenues for my research. First of all, the actors' involvement and their identities and interests and roles, I think, are really important to understand what's going on in UCEs. The second, which probably going to be the second question of my PhD, is basically exploring the process between the experiment, which is temporal in time and space, to a permanent policy. So what makes some experiments become a permanent policy and what not? And the third is
Politics.
and the third is what conditions lead to high participation levels in urban climate experiments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So far.
Was the week.
That was very helpful. Also, I will try to make some comments on the different papers and the presentations. Okay, and we can continue this discussion later. Okay, I still old school in terms of I prefer to read the papers. I found that I mean from real papers and not digital. At least it works more better for me. That the problem is that then you need to understand what is there. So First of all, I really like all the presentations and the papers. Okay, I thought it was already published, so I was trying to think in terms of
Future research.
future research, but still I want to try to contribute perhaps to that revise and resubmission.
Yeah.
But probably the comments were different, so don't feel committed to answer. The first one, you had here the research questions, but in the paper, I tried to look at them and it was difficult for me. I mean, I understood them from the reading. So I think it's what I understood. So I don't have a problem in terms of research, but just I think that it is good to bring them, particularly because of what I will say at the end of the resonance. I mean, you are going for causality at the no constitutive mechanism.
No correlation
Just a correlation.
between public opinion and strategic communications. Yes.
Okay.
I don't think we can actually convince people that
I agree.
this brings to.
I agree. That's why I am. But in a way, it's what
I think so, but I don't.
I understand there's something there, but I think the second question goes in that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you need it, but that's a decision. I think that it happens to me the same. That in a way, the paper is over theorized, but also under theorized.
Okay.
Why? Because you have a lot of good discussions on legitimacy, reputation, digital diplomacy, PDD, signaling, communication strategies. So a lot of theoretical frameworks. I think all of them are good.
Concepts.
Yes, in terms of concept. But then when I try to understand what is the paper about, I think it's about reputation. I mean, I can understand that legitimacy is there as a mechanism, like normative legitimacy there. But if you think the paper is also about legitimacy and reputation, then I think you need to enter into discussion of the overlapping. What is legitimate that is not reputation, or what is reputation that is not legitimacy? And also because what you find later, I think it's about how professionality, etc., helps to reputation, in fact. I don't think you need the legitimacy as an independent variable. I
It's a
think
component in how actors get reputation. Reputation is
okay.
composed of professionalism, credibility, and legitimacy.
So I got it. So in that case, it's exactly how I thought about this. I agree that the reputation is what you want, and those are the mechanisms. I don't. In that case, I'm not sure you need legitimacy in the title or bringing. And then in the subtitle, I understand that there's a special issue in legitimacy, but I think it may confuse more than help there. But I still think that the theoretical framework it's wonderful. I mean, the literature review is amazing, and as someone that works on legitimacy, I think all of these concepts are good. Just perhaps
Combine.
yes, or even if this is the way now. Sometimes for me are good images, figures, right? How you see these mechanisms affecting reputation and so on. Perhaps that may help. Very clear method. The research is like good empirics. I like the idea that you went for also strategies and also resonance, but that's difficult. I mean, when in my course on legitimate, I tell them you can look at how actors carry out legitimation strategies, communication strategies, etc. Measuring that, it's a mess. And I think we all fall there when it's not.
So you think that the graphic on the role of each of the strategies not so good, or you talk about the public opinion?
No, that's good. No, the problem is the impact. I mean, because saying then, even hinting, or I understand that constitutive mechanisms could be that it allowed, but that in fact that reputation of NATO then helped perhaps to Sweden and no, and Austria, Sweden and Austria.
Sweden and Finland.
Finland and Finland, sorry, to enter then, I mean, it is very difficult to say. As you said, the realist argument. I mean, when you feel insecure, you just go for what you have. I'm not sure you need that. I think it's find the paper without making that argument. I think you can give this, perhaps these cases as illustration of that reputation. Perhaps some illustrations of how Finland and Austrian politicians, etc., talk about NATO regarding professionality, credibility, your own mechanism, legitimacy, etc. I don't think you need that. I think the paper is fine without it. And that's what not it, but that's my bias. Where is the battle there?
Where's the what?
The battle. I mean, because I can understand the puzzle. Okay, the puzzle about that NATO, I mean, is being contested now. So all international organizations are being contested, in particular by populists, etc. But still, in general, when someone needs a legitimation strategy, it's because there is a legitimation deficit.
Right.
It is being contested, that legitimacy. And I don't see here who is contesting it, who is delegitimizing NATO. I mean, perhaps I can imagine, I know that but perhaps you can bring a bit, perhaps in the intro, perhaps in the conclusions, this will strengthen the puzzle, I think. Anyway, I mean, this is an amazing paper, and I would love to continue reading work on this. I think I thought about a lot of further research in this sense, self-legitimation and other discussions. Perhaps at the end, I'm sorry for that, but I'm not sure we have a lot of time at the end. You can, okay, I will move. So, Emma. Also, great paper, and I mean, it's a great puzzle in this sense. I mean, it's like I was thinking about the security dilemma. I mean, with that, security dilemma is that you arm yourself, but the other things that I mean, you arm yourself because you want to defend yourself, but the other thing you are attacking them. You may attack them, right? And in this way, well, who thinks this is constructive? I mean, in general, when we receive criticism, we feel that may be destructive. So I think that's what is, I mean, why this is puzzling, and I think it's a great, I mean, a lot of great questions you have from here. And you said perhaps it's too much. I'm not sure if it's too much. I think the question is, what do you want to operationalize then empirically? I will know. First, theoretical framework, it remind me of those discussions about Habermasian versus Gramscian logics, right? The cultures of conversation, of discussion, right? Habermasian is about the dialoguing. You know, Thomas Ries's work on communicative action, right? How, I mean, this remind me that the literature. I think you can try to engage with this. I mean, that criticism, in a way, could be a sort of communicative action that you come and you are dialoguing with that friend, perhaps. I think the huge question here is the epistemological question, even before the methodological. How do you know it? So you have two questions here. It's why and how. Why they go for constructive criticism, and the second is how. Your mechanism, that amazing mechanism, it's about the how. I think there you have the best contribution in terms of theory. I was searching more for the why. I mean, you have that, but then if you will not operationalize that at the end, I mean, so I'm not sure you need that why. Okay, I think you can write a full paper on why criticize. What?
On how? On how, and then on why.
Yeah, I think you have two. If you want, I mean, you have an amazing research project. You can go for why, and then interview. When I wrote interviews, when you interview people, why are you doing that? And I think this is in a way, I mean, everyone says that he wants to be constructive, right? But why you want to be constructive? Why you are, I mean, I think that if you go for that, that could be an amazing paper just on that. Just on, and that then later empirically checking the why thing.
If it's about the how, I think then I guess in the empirics you will need to show the difference. If you're going for content analysis, so you might be inductive categories. The categories are the ones that it's not only about checking who is doing, but which mechanisms they are using. I think you want to operationalize that theoretical framework. I want to know more on the empirics. I mean, it's fantastic. Okay, I just don't know enough. For example, about Spain. Spain was silenced. Why? I mean, they are not being silenced now in the war, but then were so silenced. I'm not sure, but if they were silenced, so the why question there, from what I know of the Spanish government, it's very, very puzzling. I think it's an amazing paper, and the other possibilities perhaps the under which conditions. That perhaps this is what you have here, in fact, that there are governments that at some points, that remember the German ambassador that came to the parliament, the first time he came, he was much more constructive than the second one. So, I mean, you might change your criticism with the dynamics, right? Concern, great concern, condemn, huge condemn, right? So perhaps the dynamic, under which condition you are more or less constructive, perhaps that dynamic, if you have that, in empirics, that maybe good. So in empirics, show difference of constructive versus not constructive. Perhaps if you can show that in empirics, I would love to read that. Not a lot of time, but still, Einat, I will go first for the paper. You started by saying, well, I don't think I need to explain you why cities are important for...
In the presentation, not in the paper.
Not in the paper, for the climate change. Yes, you need. I mean, we're talking about this. Yes, you need, because I guess that if you are talking with people from geography, for sure you don't need, but for me, it's puzzling. Why? I mean, I understand that they are part of the problem. Why they need to be part of the solution? I'm not sure they need to be part of the solution, because I believe national governments have ministries, etc. So the why question, I agree with you, but you need still to convince, I think, the public, and I think that will help you to relate regarding the problem, then the research problem, to perhaps refine it a bit. We can talk about that later, and the who and the why and the who. I mean, I want to know more on who is doing this, who is carrying out these urban climate change experiments. Coming from politics, etc., I want to know more about the actor. Who is doing this? What's his interest? What he achieves through this? Perhaps it will help also regarding the outcomes. Ina, wow, it's a lot, and I don't know where to start. Why you need the democratic backsliding and the resistance? I'm not sure. I think if you manage to prove that there's connection between populism and corruption, that's amazing. That's enough. Or the other way around, the endogeneity. That perhaps it's corruption, the one that is bringing you to populism. That might also help. I can imagine a lot of cases in Latin America, Venezuela is a and what I work on the international connections. Okay, you see a lot of connections between the countries based on these corruptions, between international states and some non-state actors there. So I think it's an amazing puzzle, and some of your responses seem amazing. Perhaps just some hypotheses. I would like, instead of a lot of elements that may be affecting you, perhaps go for 1, 2, 3 hypotheses that for you, those are the explanations of why populists lead to more corruption. That's what I understand. Or on how they capitalize on elite corruption. You have there Meloni. That's also interesting. So I will stop here. I have more comments if you want. We can discuss them later. And I open the floor to questions from our audience, or questions between you. We don't have a lot of time, and I guess we all want to go back home. But anyway, please. Who wants to start or ask? Why not?
I have a really short questions / comments. first to Manuel, which is an amazing research, I immediately thought about the relationship between Germany and Israel. Friends give criticism. And I thought it could be also interesting, as Daniel suggested, to explore it as a relationship on the timeline. So not the European Union and several countries, but Germany, Israel, how the criticism evolved over time in different cases. I'm sure it's something I thought it could be really, really interesting because it's a relationship, right? It's part of a relationship that is evolved and have ups and downs. Carla, I was wondering if you explored this, a sentiment analysis or some kind, and not just in Finland, in Sweden, towards the strategy of NATO, because these are crazy times, right? And I was wondering what the crowd opinion is of NATO. I have no idea.
Yes, we focused on Finland and Sweden. In fact, we are doing this. So Eyal is the responsible for public opinion, and he's the one who insists on causal relationship. I'm more public diplomacy and,
Strategies,
strategies and
yeah.
communicative strategies. I published a couple of months ago a paper on humanitarian organization, public diplomacy and communicative strategies in times of humanitarian crisis, such as the refugee crisis, the Syrian civil war, and Nepal earthquake. And we saw that there is a consistency in nowadays, because of digital outlets and social media, which became very, very strong, tool in the hands of states and to impact, reputation, etc. So this time, we only checked Finland and Sweden, but I think it is useful also to enlarge the project and to see how the public opinion in other states, but such as in Russia maybe, but the other states are already members in NATO. So the critical state. So the critical case is those two, and now maybe Ukraine and Georgia.
Last question I wanted to ask is, if you've noticed cases of populism without corruption that were challenging for you. You said, this one is challenging my theory of the connection.
No, but
No.
maybe, but Italy, she still doesn't show any corrupt actions, but I think it's also course.
Remind that populists generally come to power through anti-corruption.
Yes,
scores.
it's just
Yeah.
the beginning.
We are against the corrupt elite in general, so
Yeah. Okay.
in some cases they try at least at the beginning to take care of this. That's what from I know, but we probably know more than me. Yes.
Tal, I really like the paper, but I'm also not convinced by the causality thing. But perhaps rather, I mean, I don't know if this is an issue in the review, that in the comments that you got, but perhaps you can get rid of the graph on public opinion and rather focus on the variation in the dominance of the of certain narrative and explain that variation just based on the calculation of NATO and what NATO tries, and perhaps conceptualize that more to explain not only how they're try to signal, but under what conditions, they will they will use this narrative or this strategy rather than another one, so that you have a bit more, flesh. But the link to the public opinion is like, what you read you read a post on Facebook and then suddenly you become a fervent, advocate for NATO. And
the work I will have to do on AI. I don't know how to do this.
That's and question / if you have any literature, I'm interested in the link that you mentioned at the end regarding the resistance to populism and corruption. And you mentioned that its effectiveness depends on the international support. And it relates a little bit to what I'm doing. So I guess you mean the EU here is helping, adding pressure, but what happens in cases like Israel in which there is no EU?
Yeah.
So if there isn't, I'm really interested in that, if there is any literature on how civil society in other countries or other governments are able somehow to, perhaps Daniel, like populism, resistance. And that I wasn't quite sure. It's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.
I lived in Freiburg and they had also this lab thing. I'm not sure what you mean by archetype. What are you-
categorizations.
Typology of,
Typology of types of urban climate experiments.
you are urban planner?
No, actually, I'm
You
from.
don't, you are not
public
IR.
But one of my supervisors is from geography.
Wow, it's exactly urban planning. You know, my
Yes, it
husband
is.
is an architect and it is. So I said to myself, yeah, I need to be here to see the presentation.
It's urban
Okay.
planning with public policy. and
Okay,
policy.
okay, okay.
Ila, you wanted to ask?
I can skip.
No, no.
Okay, so just two quick comments, a question for Tal. So do you also look at mandate expansion? I mean, is there any correlation between mandate expansion and membership expansion, whether an organization
NATO's
is
mandate
more
to do.
NATO or other international organization, whether the organization is more willing to assume more and more responsibilities, and then it also goes with the search for
We didn't, but
expansion.
it's a good question.
Maybe you can look at the mandate and see if there's any correlation. I have a question for you regarding the methodology. So why are you even using interviews? Because as I understand you are looking for the official view, right? Official statements of governmental representatives. And in interviews, what you get is more of maybe personal views, or either to understand the logic beneath that's the point.
Yeah, it's.
Okay,
yeah,
to
they're
understand why a
official,
certain
they are
country should-
representative, and we ask them, why did your government take this stance? Why did you express it this way? What were the considerations when you were drafting the statement? Who drafted the statement? Some other countries decided to use silence. Why did you feel like to say something? So we want to, that's the why. We want to understand from their perspective why that country did so.
Okay, so basically to trace the process that led this country to issue certain statement.
Or not. Sometimes they just say,
Um,
you say that we are supposedly friends of Israel, but you don't really care about you. It's quite tough sometimes.
All right, and
I
a
don't
last
care.
quick remark, I personally had a hard time with understanding exactly the definition of constructivist criticism. So when it becomes constructive, sorry. So when it become not I mean, where is
Yeah,
exactly the border? Mhm.
You might have also further research there in the resonance, the other side. It's a sort of experiment or something like that. I think constructive it's very connected to how it resonates on the other side. Yeah, and if it managed to be seen as constructive or destructive. You may think perhaps for the future.
It's the title.
Yes. You want to comment?
אני שזה לדבר איתם.
מצוין. אני מצטער, אני לא התכוונתי, באמת. As thank you very much anyway for the presentations. I hope we will continue this conversation, and congratulations for the papers and the presentation.